Thank you.
Ta-da! Okay. Now I wish I could hide my face. Uh, windows are an essential part of every synagogue. Levi Cooper spiritualizes them in a significant way, but there's a wonderful story about the Helmites. And the Helmites were building a building, and there were no windows. And the Helmites were told that each of them needed to bring a candle, because how else would they light the building? And ultimately, the Helmites were told you have to build windows in your synagogue. Why? Because synagogues and the prayers that take place within them should not simply be within the walls. They should focus on what's going on outside the walls. We've always talked about in our synagogue the need to apply what we talk about, what we pray about, to the world outside. That's why windows are an essential part of synagogues. In history, it used to be that windows were placed exclusively, and I'm talking about ancient history, facing Jerusalem. That way everybody knew which way to face. Ultimately, there was a question of, because this is Jewish life, how many windows? And the initial vision was for what? Oh, wait, I'll get to the size of the windows in a minute. Because in Judaism, size matters. And originally they said, okay, for a number, it makes sense to do 12 windows, because 12 are the numbers of the tribes, and that way the tribes will be represented, and that way everybody's part of the synagogue.
Everybody's happy.
That's a stretch.
Judaism, nobody's happy.
Everyone's
then the question.
Everyone's included.
Everyone's included and equally unhappy, right? And,
I didn't say that.
And argumentative. So then the question was how big the windows should be. And there were two ways of looking at this question in halakha. One way was to say that the windows should be a particular measurement of size. That is, feet, inches, meters, however you want to measure, they should be a particular size. The other way to measure was that you should be able to see certain things outside the window in order to assure that the windows were sufficiently large. And so the things listed are, you should be able to see people and nature, right? So that you should be able to see those things outside your window. Why is that so important? Because that's the world in which those prayers that we utter inside live outside. And now my thing's not working. There we go. Whoops. Okay. And where does this originate? In the book of Daniel. When Daniel learned it had been put in writing, he went to his house, in whose upper chamber he had windows made facing Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he knelt down and prayed and made confession to God, as he had always done. So all of a sudden, when Daniel, in the book of Daniel, when Daniel finds out that prayers are in writing, Daniel then goes to his house, and only the upstairs had windows. And so he went to the room with windows that were made facing Jerusalem, and there is where he prayed. That becomes very important for the way we think about windows in synagogues. Because in the Talmud, based on that, we have many halachot, rules, are derived from evoking the prayers of biblical characters. Rabbi Chia Bar Abba said one should always pray in a house with windows. Well, the commentators then get into a huge discussion. Is this a house or is this a synagogue? And they are the way they resolve this is they say, well, primarily for a house, because synagogues weren't necessary. But as soon as synagogues were necessary for the assembly of the people, then yes, synagogues needed to have windows too. And on the topic of prayer, it says later on, a few pages later on in Brachot, Reb Chia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said, one may only pray in a house with windows, all because of that verse in Daniel.
Ooh.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello. I had an awful time getting on.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I'm here.
Okay.
Sunspots, you know.
You probably have put a hex on it, so I couldn't.
No, there are days I'd like to, but I didn't. Okay. So in our congregation, we are fortunate to have many windows. And the two new ones, the most beautiful windows in our congregation, are on the wall facing the bima. So that in prayer, that's where you're watching. You're luckier than I am. I don't get to look at the windows. You all do.
Oh, we get to look at you.
Well, now you get to look at something beautiful instead of me.
We'll let that go.
Oh, you're a good woman, Sarah. So we're going to talk specifically about these windows and some of the component parts. We're going to get to more component parts, but this is some of them. Okay? At the top, and Nancy will correct me if I get this wrong. At the top, we have images of Jerusalem. Then we have the Magen David. Then we have the Hebrew, which on this window is the holiness code from the Amidah. And then the ovals, which are images of our past, of our older windows. You'll see blue stripes in the, whoops.
Elliot, are you trying to share the screen, or are you sharing the screen?
I am sharing the screen.
Oh, okay. I'm not seeing that, but.
Does everybody see the shared screen?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
Beautiful.
I do.
Okay,
There you go. Now I see it.
we got it.
Yep.
Yep.
You'll see we're going to talk about the blue stripes that exist here and here. We're going to talk about this space here, which is reminiscent of the Choshen, the breastplate, and finally, hard to see in these pictures, but I have better pictures later on, images from the Maple City, which is what Honesdale was known as at one point. Now, let's see if this works. There we go.
Cool.
Okay. The top image of Jerusalem.
I send stuff all day.
The interesting thing about this image of Jerusalem, in addition to the domes, etc., is the color. Jerusalem is all built with Jerusalem stone. In fact, it's the law. Whether it's new construction or renovation, you have to use Jerusalem stone. And that's been true since the British Mandate. Sir William McLean in 1918, the city engineer of Alexandria, Egypt, drew up a master plan for the British for Jerusalem. And as part of that master plan, everything had to be in that color of stone. And that rule, that law has existed to this day. And in fact, now 5 other cities in Israel have adopted the same rule. Modi'in, Tzfat, there's Efrat. I don't remember the other cities off the top of my head, but there's 2 other cities have decided that Jerusalem stone also needs to use. It's a locally quarried limestone. And it's said that because of this, the toughness of this stone during the War of Independence in 1948, the damage caused by shelling during the siege of Jerusalem was minimized because this limestone is so very strong. And so the stones, you'll see if you look at images online of the Western Wall or the walls of the Old City, it shares the color. I'm pointing at the screen. It shares the colors of that Jerusalem cityscape across the top.
So, Elliot, if I can jump in here a little bit.
Dive right in.
Okay, so if you look at the ovals, the non-golden is more the natural color of the line of the Jerusalem stone, but Jerusalem, when it's struck by light, it glows, and that's where the more golden color is. So it's both and there.
And which gave rise ultimately, so I'm going to skip forward a little bit, which gave rise ultimately to the song Jerusalem of Gold,
right?
Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. But it also becomes very important because the imagery of the Talmud is that, you remember, and we've studied this in the past, the world was given beauty, and 9/10 of it were in Jerusalem, and 1/10 was for the rest of the world. And the image that's given in the Talmud of those 9/10 of beauty that were given to Jerusalem is because of the golden hue at sunset. And one of the fascinating things is if you go to a certain area, just on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and it's an overlook, and you go stand on this promenade overlook at the sunset, and you look at the gold dome of the rock, and you see the gold dome of the rock connected to the sun, connected to the gold stone, and everything has this beautiful golden thread because of the way the sun sets that connects it all together. So the next thing is not a symbol here per se. It is what you see in the coloring on the left side here when the trees aren't blocking it on the right. And that is the coloring of pomegranates. Rimonim. Pomegranates don't get enough play in Jewish tradition. Am I doing okay, Nancy?
You're doing great.
Okay. Pomegranates don't get enough play in Jewish tradition. Everybody, the tourism symbol of Israel is those grapes carried by two guys on their backs, right? That's, if you look in the book of Numbers, it says they reached Wadi Eshkol, where they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by two men. All right? So that's the symbol of tourism. But then tucked into that same verse is and pomegranates and figs. Pomegranates are really, really important, and they don't get enough play. And this color is the image of pomegranates. So in Exodus, when describing the priest's robes, it says on its hem, make pomegranates of blue, purple, and crimson yarns. So what are pomegranates shaped like?
Bells.
Like small bells. Okay? Around the hem with bells of gold between them all. So you have these colorful bells, images, and then actual bells made of gold. A golden bell and a pomegranate, a golden bell and a pomegranate set out in that order all around the hem of the robe. So the high priest wore pomegranates. Pomegranates become particularly important around Rosh Hashanah. It is Jewish tradition that there are 613 seeds inside the pomegranate. The 3 times I've tried counting, it's never worked out to 613. And my students, the kids love the fact that it never works out, but hey, what the heck. But tradition says there are 613 seeds corresponding to the 613 commandments, and if you eat one seed at a time, you get to make a wish on each seed. And you'll probably get a little sick from eating 613 pomegranate seeds, but that's another issue.
That's your last wish. I wish I wasn't sick.
You know, Alicia, you are a very practical. This is how we know you're an accountant. You're a very practical person.
It's true. Very true.
You know, I'd be on the 615th wish thinking, oh, I should have wished back then to not be sick. That's very smart. Okay. And then we have the Magen David, which is the Jewish star, the Shield of David. Shield of David has first of all, it was never a Shield of David. Most important thing, the Shield of David was never the Shield of David. David, first of all, probably didn't have a shield, and second of all, this wasn't a symbol that was used in that way. So it's a nice story, but the Shield of David was never the Shield of David. The reason it gets the name Shield of David comes later in the early 19th century. We'll talk about that in a moment. The oldest undisputed example of the Magen David is from the 7th century before the Common Era, and it's found in Sidon, and it belongs to Joshua ben Asayahu, and it was on a piece of pottery that reflected that this belonged to him, and it was a symbol that was placed on the pottery. There were a number of symbols that were used for mystical purposes, and this was one of them. And so it meant that that piece of pottery probably held some incense or something of significance from a spiritual point of view. It did not become a symbol of a people until the early 19th century, when Jews as a community were looking for something that would symbolize Judaism in the way the cross symbolized Christianity. Jews wanted some sort of a symbol that they could hold on to. And this was becoming in common use because, for example, the Rothschilds used the symbol in their household crest. What is the shape of a crest? Anybody know? A household crest?
Shield.
What's that?
Shield.
Isn't it a shield?
Like a shield. Like a shield. Ah, wait. Like a shield. Hello.
Right.
When did it become the shield of Abraham? When Jews as individual households started using it in their household crests in the early 19th century, it becomes the shield of David. Because why? Jews are known as the descendants of the household of David. So now we've got it used in that way. In Germany, there were a number of people, and I'm blocking the name off the top of my head, but who used the symbol on stationery. So that it was their way of saying, this is who I am. Because it was very common in the 19th century for Christians to put a cross in the upper left corner, or 3 crosses, depending on the tradition they followed, in the upper left corner of their stationery. When does it become associated with Israel in particular? In the late 19th century, Herzl's Zionist journal, Die Welt, the very first issue used the Shield of David, the Magen David, the Jewish star, as its emblem. And thus the Magen David becomes the symbol for this new hope and new future for the Jewish people associated with Israel. It is in blue. We'll talk about the blue later. But now it's become a symbol of Israel. So above we have Jerusalem, pomegranates from the land of Israel, which grow plentifully and wildly there. The Jewish star, we're going to talk about the blues and some of the other stuff in a minute.
Can I ask a question?
Any questions or comments so far?
Yeah, I have one. You're saying late 19th century it becomes predominant. Was it in the old windows? I don't remember. And that would have been mid 19th century.
It was not in the old windows. It was above the front door. It is still today above the front door of the building. And Jews started using the symbol in the mid 19th century in a significant way. It didn't become associated with Israel until the late 19th century with Theodor Herzl.
So Nancy could tell you that the only request I made when we were designing these was to put the star at the top. And that's because it's my concern that one day, like many other synagogues, it will be a social hall or a museum or even a church. And I wanted something of permanence on the inside of that building that would say, this is who we are, this is who we were, and it will be existing for a long time.
Excellent. Excellent.
Good.
Liz. Yep.
All right, anything else here so far? Great,
Yeah.
we're moving on. The next is the Hebrew words. So as you're facing the left side, I think.
Yeah.
Am I right, Nancy?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. It's so new to me, I can't picture it automatically. Is the words from the Amidah, the central prayer of the Amidah, the Kedusha, and which is the holiness prayer. We narrow it down, and you see in yellow the translation of the words. So remember, we sing Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot. As you go down from there, we get to Lador Vador Nagid Gadlecha. Generation to generation, we will declare your greatness. This line becomes very, very important. It actually, part of this, it comes from two different places. Generation to generation comes from a statement in the Talmud and originally in Deuteronomy, that from generation to generation, you should observe the laws. And then the response to that in the Talmud is that it is incumbent upon each generation to declare the greatness of God. Bring those together into the Amidah prayer, and it becomes, from generation to generation, we will declare your greatness. And if you think about what this window means to this congregation, and we're going to get there in a second, the old windows and the new, and the future, it is a huge statement about what goes on in that sanctuary and what that sanctuary means historically. Questions, comments, thoughts? Rolling on. The other text on the right-hand side, I had a better than 50-50 chance on that one. L'chol zman ve'et u'l'chol chafetz tachat hashamayim. It comes from the Shir HaShirim, God, my English is not good all of a sudden. Song of Songs, or from Ecclesiastes rather, that says, from every, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven. Rashi takes this as a very tough statement. He says, let not one who accumulates possessions out of vanity rejoice, for although he possesses them now, they will ultimately pass on to the righteous. Only the time has not yet arrived, because for everything has a set time when it will arrive. Rashi could have been an accountant. He takes a very practical perspective about this. Mitzudat David, from the 14th century, looks at this a little differently and says nothing is coincidental, rather there is a specific time for everything. And finally, the Gilat Yaakov in the 18th century reminds us, alternatively, one should not say that he has no time for Torah study or the performance of mitzvot. Because in reality, there is a time for everything when it is for an activity. Sorry, my typing is lousy. when it is for an activity that he really desires, there is always time, right? That's my favorite interpretation.
That's great.
Is, there's a time for everything. Yes, everybody looks at it because of the doors and says, oh, it's about nothing is coincidental. But if you look at that last interpretation, it's really more about us than it is the fact that everything's predetermined. It says to us, there is time for everything if you want to make time for it. And it's a beautiful way of looking at the way we live our lives. Okay, moving on. So, Liz, I'm going to let you tell the story. You're going to tell it again in a couple of weeks, but I'm going to let you tell the story of the amber light.
So in preparation for the 175th year, I asked my cousin Corinne Katz Hexter, who grew up in Honesdale. She's 95 and sharp as anybody could be. What are her memories of Honesdale and Beth Israel? So we could incorporate that in whatever, documents, stories. And the first thing she said was, as a child, what she remembers most was the amber glow of the synagogue from the stained glass windows. These windows were destroyed in 1942 when she was a young girl. So my daughter Elizabeth wanted to do something in honor of my leadership of the congregation. And she said, what would you like? And I said, I'd like the amber glow back. And so that's where it is.
And the ovals, the colors, the shapes, etc., are reminiscent of those older windows of the congregation. And I tried to put in the picture of the older windows in the congregation, and it just didn't work right. So I took it back out.
Also, it's black and white, so it's hard to see.
Yeah.
I have seen reference to them somewhere in a document somewhere that they were, quote, Tiffany windows, but I don't know as they were made by Tiffany or that was just a name of a style.
Yeah, sure.
But the oval shape was definitely part of those original windows.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so we have in these windows that are brand new something that ties us to our wonderful history.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now we get to the blue. There are blue lines. The Magen David Adom is in blue, but I want to be specifically talking about the blue lines. I'm watching Nancy and I'm wondering if I'm doing okay over here.
No, you are. You just said the Magen David Adom, which I'm sure has been on your mind. The red.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
But the Magen David is blue.
The
Yes.
Magen David, the Jewish star. Yeah, oops.
That's all.
The blue lines in particular. So in the book of Numbers, God says, speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes, tzitzit, on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. The tzitzit are so that when you look at them, you are reminded of the mitzvot, of the commandments. The blue was a very rare color in that time, and as a result became extraordinarily symbolic, not just in Jewish culture, but in a variety of the cultures in the Middle East. So the blue becomes very important. And we're going to hear about its importance in a moment about the Israeli flag as well. But let's just stay on the color blue for a moment. The blue becomes so important that it becomes part of the talit, and you will see talitot with a blue thread in the tzitzit, but you will also see a talit with blue stripes within them, and that comes from Or HaChaim in the book of Numbers, in his commentary on the book of Numbers, where he writes, another reason why the Torah wrote Ledorotam in the middle of the verse describing the commandment of the blue threads is that the commandment consists actually of two parts, white threads and blue threads. Now that becomes important for two reasons. One, in the tzitzit, it allows the blue threads to be distinguished. Remember what I've always said, the Arlo Guthrie phrase, you can't have light without darkness to stick it into, right? You have to have contrast. So we have the white threads to make the blue threads stand out. That becomes important when designing the Israeli flag. Whoops. Did I skip that? Or did it not get in?
Yeah.
It did not get in.
It's
Okay.
really
So the Israeli flag comes about, oh, yeah, here we go. Hang on. This takes me a moment. The Israeli flag comes about in 1885. In its beginnings, in 1885 in Rishon LeZion, they used a blue and white flag that incorporated a Star of David, which was blue, against a white flag. Okay, and it became a banner for Zion. Uh, Finally, though, the flag that we have in Israel, the closest one came from a design by a fellow named Jacob Askowitz and his son Charles Askowitz, who developed the flag of Judah, which was displayed in July of 1891 at the dedication of the Zion Hall of the B'nai Zion Educational Society, where? In Boston, Massachusetts. It's based on the talit, which was the flag, and it had white with narrow blue stripes near the edges, and in the center, the Magen David. In this case, it had the word Maccabee painted in blue letters across it. Those were taken out ultimately in the third assembly of Zionist assembly, the last of the Zionist assemblies led by Herzl. And what happens? It becomes the flag of the Zionist movement. It is known as Herzl's flag. And the first formal use of it outside the Zionist movement meetings was not for the state of Israel, but was for the death of Theodor Herzl. The flag of the state of Israel, not yet in existence, was placed over his coffin. And that flag ultimately became the flag for the state of Israel. And thus the blue stripes that you see, reminiscent both of the talit, but also of the blue stripes at the top and the bottom of the flag of Israel. Everybody with me? Questions, comments?
I was always taught that the Bima, the congregation and the Torah should always face east. And that was towards Jerusalem.
Yes, the Talmud says you should face Jerusalem when you are praying. I worked for a number of years at Temple Sholem in Chicago. Temple Sholem's ark faces west. And one of the great questions put to the designers in the architectural firm of Lobel and Schlosser was, why is it facing west? It was built in 1928, finished just before the crash in August of 28. What happens? It was built facing the west because these were proud Reformed Jews, and Jerusalem was not the center of their lives. And so they were going to stick it to the people who felt that Jerusalem was at the center by twisting everything 180 degrees and facing west to say, we no longer feel that way about Jerusalem. And that was, for congregations in America, the tradition for a period of time that were founded as Reformed congregations. Ours, founded as a German congregation, would not have followed that particular tradition. So yes, that is the way it is taught. And yes, there are many synagogues that do face east, and yes, there are also some that don't. And the reason they don't is sometimes for architectural reasons, but also sometimes for their own spiritual and religious reasons. And you can often tell what year the synagogue was built based on the placement of the ark.
There is, of course, the D&H Canal piece of land that they gave us. Any other direction wouldn't have been possible.
Right.
Yeah,
Details.
like I said, architectural reasons.
Yeah.
There's a famous congregation designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and Frank Lloyd Wright got into a huge argument with them because they wanted the ark facing east, and he did not believe that the exterior of the building would look right if that important space, because of the design of the roof, was facing east. And there was a significant argument, and at one point he almost pulled out of the project because of that discussion. On the other hand, you have the building by I.M. Pei, North Shore Congregation Israel in Chicago, where their building and their ark face east, and everything works because it faces the lake. So architecturally it fit, and spiritually it fit. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So the next piece is at the bottom, and it is reminiscent of the choshen, the breastplate, worn by the high priest. On the left is the window. On the right is a modernist interpretation of the choshen, of the breastplate. You will see they are different colored stones, and we'll talk about whether the stones represented here are accurate in terms of both color and size. And the breastplate, notice there's nothing plate about it. It is woven with stones on it. The breastplate becomes the important symbol, not just for the high priest, it's worn over his tunic, but also for modern Jewish life. If you look in our ark at the Torahs, you will see each one has, wait for it, a breastplate. That is because we preserve in modernity, even in the absence of the priesthood, the images of the priesthood. And we do that in a number of ways around the Torah, and we'll have another time to talk about that at some point, but it includes the band God, I'm moving my hands around, you can't even see them. The band that looks like a belt that the high priest wore, which is the belt that holds the Torah together, etc., etc. Okay, so upon each of the stones is engraved the name of one of the 12 tribes. They're in a specific order. We'll talk about that in a second. So now we're going to go into the breastplate for a moment. It begins in Exodus 28. God tells Moses, bring forward your brother Aaron and his sons from among the Israelites to serve me as priests. Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, Ithamar, sons of Aaron, and make vestments for your brother Aaron for dignity and adornment. Well, what the heck is dignity and adornment? You would think, it's redundant saying it again and again. So what's dignity and adornment? Well, the commentators don't believe in redundancy, and so they say these are two different things. Dignity is about how they feel when wearing it. Adornment is about how other people perceive them when they are wearing it. Okay? Dignity is internal, adornment external. Everybody with me?
Yeah.
That becomes important. And then, later in that same chapter, you shall make a breastpiece of decision worked into a design, make it in the style of the ephod, make it of gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns of twisted fine linen. There's a whole question, and the Talmud has a whole long discussion about what gold yarn is, because it's not gold color. The Talmud says it's actually gold spun into yarn. I have issues with that, but
Well, let me step in here as one of the textile historian types.
Uh-huh.
Had to be metal gold. There was no gold dye. The only dyes at the time were indigo, blue, purple, which were made from seashells, and crimson made from crushed bugs.
Great.
I love
Right,
that I have
Nancy?
you on this call.
Right,
That-
Nancy?
Yeah, yeah, right on.
Had to be real gold.
Yeah.
I'm very impressed because they've tried to spin real gold, according to this, at a place called the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. And to say that they have challenges would be a generous statement. They set in it mounted stones in 4 rows of stones. First row shall be a row, and then these are the names translated of the stones. Lovely translations. Who the heck knows if they're accurate? There is a whole series of commentaries, and in fact, an entire book written by a 16th century scholar, North African scholar, about what these stones of the Bible might be. And basically, he says toward the end of the book, we don't actually know. We can surmise based on other uses of these words in other texts and try and determine what may be common and available, but we can't be certain of it. And then we frame them with gold in their mountings. The stones shall correspond in number to the names of the sons of Israel, the 12 tribes, corresponding to their names, and shall be engraved like seals, each with its name for the 12 tribes. So what we've got in this Hoshen, I'm pointing at the screen again, is 12 tribes set up each in rows of 4. That is
Rows and columns.
vertically. What's that?
Those are columns.
Yes,
Column,
but in the Bible, a row is a vertical row.
interesting.
Because in the Bible, a row is built around people lining up for battle.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What happened to the 13th tribe? Why was it never depicted again?
Okay, so there's going to be a whole thing. We can talk about it at length. There wasn't actually a 13th tribe. There was a proclaimed 13th tribe, and just as easily as it was proclaimed, it was unproclaimed. That's the short form. So imagine these stones were supposed to be whole stones. No metal should have touched them, right? So there's 2 questions that come. First question is, well, how do you get them? And they say, well, you got to take the whole stone. You can't chisel them into beautiful designs like on this, which means they were big stones. They were heavy because you had to take the whole stone. The second question is, how do you get the engraving upon them? And they say it's done by a worm that knew the names of the tribes, and the secretions from the worm, the Talmud tells us, engrave the stones. I'm not so big on that particular myth, but that's what it says. I'm just telling you what it says. But think about this. You've got gold. You've got all this tapestry. You've got these heavy stones. It is not easy to carry around. You don't go jogging marathons wearing this stuff. And there's a whole costume that goes with it. Imagine, if you will, the weight of all of this.
Elliot, before you go away from the picture, if you can go back to the picture, there were 2 things I want to say about it. First of all, when Mark was assembling this part of the window, I was in Israel. And one of the reasons I was in Israel at the time that I was because there was a newborn baby that I wanted to meet, who actually happened to be named Choshen Yisrael.
Wow.
It was really kind of trippy that Mark was building the Choshen, putting that together while I was meeting little Choshen Yisrael.
Wow.
And so that's one piece. The other thing is when I first spoke to Elizabeth, who wanted to make these windows to honor her mother and the community, and she was telling me about her mother, she mentioned that Liza was a quilter. And I have been a quilter as well. And I guess once a quilter, always a quilter. And so I was very aware of that when putting together the windows in general, but specifically the Choshen. And this design is not so uncommon in the quilting world. Correct, Liza? So anyway, that was on my, yeah. So there you go.
Great.
That's for you, Liza.
Thanks, Nance.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to the breastplate,
Okay.
away from the quilt for a moment.
Yep.
The colors represent the different colors of the banners of the flags of the various tribes, because we are told both in Exodus and again in Deuteronomy that the flags encamped under their flag. So there wasn't a flag of Israel, rather there were 12 flags. Each camp had its own flag. That way, from a distance, you knew where you were going. Why do I know so much about this? Because when Shira was in 5th grade, we did a Tribes of Israel and how they were encamped with their flags, and we got an A on that project. So,
On the other hand, there were no dyes, so I challenged the fact that there would have been 12 different colors. There were 3 dyes.
there may have been gradations of color.
There you go.
And the flags had the names of the tribes, so you could find yourself in the crowd. So remember, we're talking about how heavy this thing is.
Mm-hmm.
In Deuteronomy, Moses says to the people of Israel, I cannot bear the burden of you by myself. The idea that it's a burden to be the leader of Israel is a persistent theme in Jewish tradition. And the notion that it is a weighty, and I use that term quite literally, a weighty responsibility. Shlomo Riskin, Stevie Riskin, a rabbi in Israel, says the religious leaders of Israel, the nation of the book, the nation of the law, the nation with a mission to the world, must first render judicial decisions for their own people, determine policy, provide religious, ethical, and moral direction. But at the same time, they must be painfully aware that they bear responsibility for their decisions and their consequences. Thus, the high priest, when referring to the Choshen, must literally bear the burden of every member of the 12 tribes. He literally has to carry their names on his shoulders. And so the Choshen is a symbol both of the 12 tribes, but also of the weightiness of leadership of the Jewish people. With me so far? And I'm right on time. Okay. Honesdale, as Liza taught me in my 2nd or 3rd year, was known for a time as the Maple City. And that comes about because the picturesque borough, according to the Honesdale Historical Society, was made even more so in 1847, when the Borough Council had 1,500 shade trees planted throughout the town. On the basis of this initiative, Honesdale earned the nickname Maple City. Thank you, Sally, for getting this for me. Residents of the city took pride in the handsome public square laid out between Church Street and the courthouse. This venue for both formal and recreational came to be known during the 1850s as Central Park. So there's this maple tree origin of the of Honesdale. At the Dorflinger Glass Factory, Nancy observed the drawings on the left, where you see winter, spring, summer, and fall. And that ultimately those would be cut into glass at Dorflinger to symbolize the fact that we are a Honesdale congregation here in the Maple City. Nancy has cut those same images into our windows. Now, most of you didn't see it because it was already shade by that point, because these are at the bottom. These were sandblasted in, right, Nancy?
Yeah, yeah, and it's very subtle. I have to say, they're very subtle. And I want to say too that in my initial conversation with Liza, she did mention that one of the things before I saw the designs to work with, she mentioned wanting to incorporate the 4 seasons into the windows. So this was the way of doing it. When I saw the designs, it was like, okay, we're going to work with that. And this is
well, and in many ways that makes it 3-dimensionally spiritually.
okay.
That is, L'Ador Vador,
Yeah.
it transcends time, but also it transcends the seasons.
Right.
And so you see that in a number of ways represented in the windows, and that's an amazing thing for us. All right, so let me stop the share. So you see in the windows endless symbolism. What I hope it helps us do is when you're sitting there, even when I get to a chance to look at them, that you don't focus on one piece, that there's so many pieces to look at, there's so many pieces to focus on, there's so many pieces that inspire and enhance and ennoble the work we do within that sanctuary. We are certainly indebted to Nancy and Mark for their incredible artistry, but also to our tradition that brings us and brings that artistry to this point, to those windows. It is a fitting, a more than fitting successor to the historic windows of our congregation from the early 20th century. And on that note, oh, look at this, right on schedule. On that note, take any questions, comments. One of the things that I want to say, I think I said it last night, is I wish you could have all seen yourselves as you walked into the building. Every person in turn, their jaw dropped. And I had sent out pictures, and people had said they saw the pictures online. Didn't matter. Every person, including me, their jaw dropped when they walked into the building to see these windows. It transforms our spiritual space.
The thing I noticed online was how large they are. Up until then, because I've only seen pictures and photographs, until I saw them next to you, I didn't realize how really large and how they take over the building.
Everything looks large next to me, Liza.
Yes, even Alan Smith, as I recall. But it's a joke,
Alicia,
Nancy.
I can't hear you.
I know. Yeah.
I'm being quiet.
The joke,
Yes,
in case
Sarah,
any
and
of
I
you
thank
missed it,
you.
is
No,
when Elliott first came to town, someone asked
I
Mom.
told him.
Oh, you did? Okay.
We already,
Yeah. Only
I'd like
shorter.
to,
Only shorter.
I'd like to congratulate all the people who worked on this project, not only to make our temple beautiful, but to make the people aware of how we. And Nancy and Rabbi and Lisa and everybody else, congratulations.
And Mark.
And Mark.
I am
The
more
only thing-
excited than ever. You know, one of the things I'm working on now is getting out a schedule to you of our 175th anniversary events, and I am more excited than ever to welcome the Honesdale community and the summer visitors, etc., to visit our building and see those windows. I've already had a very brief conversation with the director of Camp Mosheva, because we have a strong historic connection with them, about certainly bringing his staff, but also bringing some of the older units over to see the windows.
Mom, mute yourself.
All right, I'm muting Mom for you.
Thank you.
I want to say that it's just really been such a delightful process. I mean, logistically, there were challenges with the frames and getting, and all that to get to the point. But in terms of our relationship with the community, and getting to know the space. I mean, Mark and I came in October after having some initial communication. And when we came in October, and I had all sorts of ideas of what these windows could look like, it was a very humbling experience to walk in the space, to pick up really the character of the space unto itself. It already had its own energy, and it wasn't something that I could, impose my artistry or whatever. It was like, oh, this is solid and strong. And so the challenge was really to create something that really honored the space, and engaging with with your community has really been delightful. And I don't know, Mark and I, when we were here in October, some of we went over to the cemetery. We really wanted to get a sense of the community, and that's what brought us to the museum as well, to really get to put it all in a bigger context. And that was just of the community, never mind the whole historical Jewish reality that Elliott so wonderfully contextualized for us and shared all that information. I really appreciate that, because a lot of this stuff, as an artist, I'm not always conscious of why things come, and what it's about. But so I really appreciate that.
Well, Nancy, one of the things I want to say, and I mean this as a compliment, they look like they've been there forever.
Yes.
They fit.
Yeah. That's wonderful I really got that. Both Mark and I were talking about that. It was a strong sense that we had too. And it was like, well, wait a minute, we made them in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, So, yeah, but they did.
Well, I want to say, so it took months and months and months to make these windows, and Nancy and I, but I was right there. I made them, I cut them, I put them together, I put them on the truck, I climbed up the scaffolding and put them in. So I knew what they looked like. I was familiar with them. And Elliott talks about that jaw-dropping moment. When I came off the scaffolding and looked and stepped back, the windows don't really come alive until they're in the space they're intended to be. And it really knocked me out when I stepped back and saw what they looked like without light around them, closed off in the exact space. And it was really something to see them in place, which is where they're home now.
Yeah.
We made them in the studio, but now they're home.
Thank you.
They came alive.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Magnificent project.
Nancy, I'm going to be in touch with you over the coming weeks, because I have to write an explanation of the windows as part of our history for guests to read. So I'm going to ask you for help with that. Okay.
Yeah, great.
Folks, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. I'm sorry I couldn't be in person together and do this in front of the windows, but I'm glad we got to do this.
You did a great job, Elliott. Thank you. Really.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Have a good Shabbat, everyone. Be well.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Elliott, how was the interview, or Nancy and Mark, how was your interview with Becker?
Oh, it was good. But somebody should check with him.
Yeah.
If you got it right. Okay. We're going to go.
Will.
Good
All right.
Shabbos.
Take care. Goodbye. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Safe